work on the lands traditionally owned by the Atikamekw, Anishinaabe, and the Wanapitei First Nation. And some of what we do in the publishing house is to work towards reconciliation by sharing stories and having the voices of Indigenous peoples from this area out there. All right, so happy to have Brit Griffin with us today. Brit and I have been working together from the very beginning. We started our press with her first book, The Winterman, and here we are, almost 6 years later, and there's a third book. And I'm one of her biggest fans. I fell in love with the books right from the get-go, and really excited for people to be joining me in this love affair with these books and with Brit. And so this is a great opportunity to have a good conversation with Brit about, the series now that it's come to a finish. So let me introduce you to Brit. She is a writer and environmentalist who works as a researcher with an Algonquin community in Northwest Quebec. Her debut novel, The Winterman, was shortlisted for the 2016 Northern Lit Award for fiction. She lives in Cobalt, Ontario with her husband, Charlie Angus, and is the mother of 3 grown daughters. And let me just describe the third book. This Winterman 3, At the End of the World, wraps up as Johnny Slot tangles with new Talos strongman Eaton Love over who the future belongs to, the people and the land, or the same old capitalist profiteers. With a slim promise of spring on the horizon, megalomaniac Love is gearing up for a cut-and-run replay of business as usual, and that means grabbing the wealth that lies within the Winterman's territory. But the forests, deep snows, and wolves have a different idea about the fate of the northern landscape. Caught between these two powerful forces, Slot and his community now decide which side they're on. Can they salvage a livable future from the winter sweat remains of the planet, or is human greed just too powerful? It sounds like reality, not fiction. So welcome, Brit. How is things in Cobalt these days?
Well, we're excited that we're getting a winter storm tonight. So you must be getting it too.
Well, they're saying some snow, but I think you guys are getting more than us. But we'll see. Okay. We'll see what happens in the morning. Yes. And we will be in the Winterman land.
That's right.
Ever since I came across this book, that's all I can think about when the winter comes.
Oh, well, that's good. Good.
Imagining what I would be doing, what character I would be in this storyline. So,
who would you like to be?
Yeah. Let me see. I think I'd like to be Susan.
Interesting.
Yes. I mean, there's a good question. Who, after reading this, who would you like to be in this story? I just want to also add, you have been always getting good praise about the book. The third Winterman 3, Karen McBride, author of Crow Winter, said an exciting conclusion, a crucial reminder of our role in keeping the lands we love safe. The Cli-Fi report, the Winterman, concerning the Winterman 2, continues the fast-paced saga of the first book and adds a new layer of nail-biting climate angst. And the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, The Winterman 2, Into the Deep Dark, is a great read. Not only has Griffin created an interesting community of people and a formidable environment for them to live in, the story clips along at the perfect pace. There was another one I wanted to share and now I can't find it. I think this is it. In her climate thriller, Brit Griffin's future dystopia is a crucible for our moral choices today. How to find our way to be a better species in a world that's already changed is a path of the imagination. So this story is not just about escaping into an imaginary world. You have a lot to say about the world that we actually live in.
Yes.
So before we, tackle any of the conversation about the books, how about you give us a little taste of the text itself?
Okay, so I'm going to do a reading from the beginning of the book, and two of the main characters have gone on a trip to try and locate the ostensible hero of the book, Johnny Slot, who was probably the first character that came into being in my imagination, and he kind of carries part of the storyline in the books. So they're off to find him because he's missing from their small community. This is a group of, I guess they would be climate refugees in a way, who have decided to tough out the perpetual winter in the cultural capital of the world, Cobalt. So I will start my reading. And the woman is called Susan. She's riding down towards the Great Lake areas with Jeff, who's also from the community. I hope this works, Susan said, thinking it was probably a miracle they'd gotten as far as they had. We've been lucky, but from the looks of it, we're almost there. I am so ready to be over with this, Jeff said. Seriously, can't take another day of this weather. Like, I get the whole perpetual winter thing, but really, does it have to snow every day? Is it ever going to stop? I hope so. I think the weather's changing. I mean, you can almost see the ground in spots here. I wouldn't be breaking out the lawn chairs yet. We're just further south. That's going to make a difference in itself. Yeah, but I think the air was different on the way down. Fresher, don't you think? Susan said. The snow, thick and soft, was gathering on her dark hair. Maybe even like spring. That's what I've been thinking about. It smells sweeter, Jeff said, official group optimist. Well, what are we doing here if we're not optimists? She sat for a minute, staring down at the cabin, tipped her face upwards and said to Jeff, the sun feels strange. Everything feels strange, like surreal. Can you believe it? Jeff said. I'm like a cowboy now, some Wyatt Earp guy riding down into a gunfight. I mean, I can hardly believe it, and like I'm in the story. You know what I mean? Susan just nodded, looked back to the cabin. Jeff kept going, like it's pretend or a dream. Yeah, more like a dream, like I'm going to wake up back at the old Fraser Hotel instead of riding down to some outlaw camp. I'm tripping out on some major Clint Eastwood vibes here. Susan thought about that. The Fraser Hotel with its candlelight and big kitchen and roaring wood stove. Johnny had said that when he thought about where to hunker down for the end times, the hotel seemed like a perfect fit. Big, old, and built back in the day to stand its ground against any fire. Didn't take long for it to fill up with folks either. Christ, she missed it. And missed too the way things used to be before the winter. She and Jeff had been playing What Do You Miss the Most all the way down to the border, starting with the small things, cold beer on a summer day, a long hot bath. Jeff said what he was really missing was a long hot bath with Jordan, then said, oh, hey, sorry, at least I know Jordan's at home waiting for me. I know you must be worried about Johnny. Susan said, yeah, she was worried, left it at that. She missed lots of things, but she was also a different person than she used to be. She could live without most of the things she missed. She could even live without Johnny, but she sure didn't want to.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
When you think of that scene, when we're reading books, we wonder, how did this scene come about through the writer's imagination? So starting back to the first book, how did the beginning of this Winterman trilogy start? Where, do you recall where you were, or what sort of inspired you to start having this group of people in this particular place having these particular things happen?
Well, that's a good question. Um, I have a pretty clear idea of how both of the second and third book started. It just started with the scene in my mind, a very clear scene. The first book, I'm not quite as clear on. I know at the time when I was just starting to think about writing, writing fiction and wanting to finally do that. I'd wanted to write fiction for quite a while. Um, and I was thinking about climate change and thinking about the scenario of a perpetual winter. I had looked into the idea of a nuclear winter. I was really into just that winter you can never get away from for some reason. And from the nuclear winter kind of started to think about, okay, well, so maybe a perpetual winter scenario for climate change, because I was interested in and worried about it. And then right around that time, or maybe a little bit before, the Latchford Bridge collapsed. I don't know if you remember, but the Latchford is a small town just south of here, and the Trans-Canada Highway runs through Latchford, and there's one bridge, and it collapsed, and so that was it. Like, no one was getting through. Kids had to go from Temagami on the train to school, and people had to drive around all through Quebec to get, to the grocery stores up here. And you realized the vulnerability, that infrastructure here, that it wouldn't take very long if things got tough for things to break down. There's one road up here. And so I think thinking about that isolation and the vulnerability of the infrastructure really kind of took me down that road to thinking about, well, what would a small group of people do if they had to make the choice to stay in their home because of this winter, or leave and go down to the cities like most of the people did who in the story. So I think that was sort of its genesis in a way.
And so do you relate to that in some way? Like, do you think you would have stayed and, formed a community and hunkered down in, a bigger building for everybody to stay in?
Yes. Yeah, I don't know what it, like, for a very, very long time before writing the book, I watched every kind of apocalyptic scenario movie, and I mostly watched films about it. I didn't read so much about it, but I just had I found the idea of things coming to a head, of things being tough, of things ending, of catastrophe, like really an interesting backdrop to, how do we behave as human beings? How do we rise to the occasion? What is our idea of heroism? How do we make the proper choices when things are very tough? So I'm interested in the idea of the crucible. And I think those kinds of scenarios, from something as ridiculous as a zombie invasion to, sort of natural disasters like volcano movies or whatever, they provide that backdrop to think about, do we think of others in those situations? Or do we only think of ourselves? Do we think of fellow creatures? And how do we start making all those complicated choices? I would just always like to think about that. Seems like a good question to think about.
And your other work and your own interest in the environment, in some way fueled the storyline.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Can you share more about that?
Well, I guess climate change is a symptom in a way of how we've come to view the natural world, and certainly wouldn't be the first person to observe that one of the deep problems in the way humans relate to the world is this binary of us and nature as being outside of nature, and that real kind of alienation and extractive relationship that we have with nature. And I think that's at the core of a lot of our problems. And the reason we have such an extractive view of nature is just because we're greedy. I think we like to think of ourselves as, more of like an apex predator, but we're really more like a zebra mussel. We just latch on and suck as much out of whatever we can get our tentacles on, and I think we need to start reflecting a little bit more on how we interact with the natural world and what our place within it is, put ourselves back into it. And so in the Winterman, I explore some of those themes of how nature is how nature becomes a character, and then to be in a relationship with that character, as opposed to, kind of that classic, man versus nature scenario where you're struggling against it, but that we struggle within to save ourselves, nature and us being one.
Well, and the winter, the perpetual winter,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly in the first and the second books was um, such a force,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, um, it had the most power
Mm-hmm.
in the story, and we understand how much power it has um, through the characters and their battle with it. I mean, there's the battle with Talos and the greed of what's happening in the city, but it's um, the winter and what it does to the landscape around them, food, transportation, just like you said with Latford, the bridge going down. It's like, you there's some forces that it has way more power than we do.
Well, I think sometimes we look at nature, either as something beautiful to be appreciated, something taken to make the things that we need. But it is that sort of the numinous other, the mysterious other, and it's big and it's powerful and it's incredibly beautiful. But maybe we're just not respectful enough of that, in that sort of, that it is awe-inspiring, and that once we take our place within that, you know, we become part of that beautifulness, but we continue to, I don't know, there's a hubris to the human spirit. I was just reading about that darn Elon Musk, who actually is a person who's informed the Eat and Love character a bit in the last book.
Mm-hmm.
Just that sense that, I mean, Elon Musk is sending up all his satellites to connect us all. Well, we should already be connected through the mycelium. Like he thinks that he needs to bring the network. There's already all these beautiful networks that connect everything under the ground, the trees, and they talk to each other. But no, he's going to deliver that, and then fill the night sky with all of his satellites that become fake stars, even though there's beautiful stars, and he'll just drown them out. He'll go and create life on Mars because we've trashed this place. We'll just go trash somewhere else. So that constant hubris and greed, I think we just have to stop and look at what's here and take our place within it respectfully. And so I try and explore some of that in the Winterman.
And so, you sort of have this, good people, bad people, and choosing sides in some way. I mean, many of them have to choose sides and are confronted with situations that force them into that. In writing these books, were you trying to get a message across? Were you feeling like you're trying to get a message across before, and so now let's try fiction to do that?
I guess for me, in terms of thinking about these problems, there are political avenues and there are avenues of, environmental awareness and protest and education. And I participate in those, and I have. But I also think maybe one of the most important elements now is the imagination. So we have to start picturing ourselves and understanding ourselves differently, as a different kind of being, back within nature, behaving differently, surviving differently. So until we can imagine that alternate reality, we're not going to be able to work towards it, because we really don't have any alternative besides getting the next iPhone or ordering more packages from Amazon. Like that's how we survive, how we live, how we're connected to our commercial world. we have to shift that somehow. So I think that's an act of imagination. I think that comes from storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have to start telling ourselves new stories that lead us in a different direction and that guide us a bit better.
Okay, yeah. Um, so the first book was described as a Northern Western.
Mhm.
Um, and so tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, you mentioned earlier the sort of the good guy, bad guy thing.
Yeah.
I've always been a big fan of like the white hat, black hat. I like my good guys good and my bad guys bad. And I think that's what attracts me about that crucible of the catastrophic, is that it really does sort of, I mean, you know, you could be wishy-washy in a disaster, but it would be very bad strategy for survival. So you have to look at, well, how do people make choices in their daily life becomes heightened in this crucible. And so for me, the Western has always been one of those, you know, it's that, you know, they're either like revenge, or there's the
Mm-hmm.
bad, you know, rancher, lumber baron who's trying to freeze out the independent, you know, good pioneer. I've really enjoyed those kinds of stories in a way because, I mean, for all of the things that are wrong with the Western, they provide you with that sense that what does a person do when they're pushed and how do they behave? And that informs a lot of sort of those classic Western stories. So I was attracted to that. And I was also interested in the idea of the frontier. So the Western is about, you know, the expanding frontier, pushing, you know, across America to the West. So the frontier was always, a constant theme in the Western is the disappearance of the frontier, that civilization comes, you know, the rugged individual goes, they discover gold, steal gold from other people, steal gold from the indigenous people who are there, whatever. The pioneers come behind them, families come, towns come, they build a life there, and the frontier is gone. So it's that loss of frontier is a real Western motif. But in the Winterman, it's the opposite. The frontier is expanding, like everything is contracting from the hinterland down into the city. And so it's that creation of frontier I was interested in, just as kind of something to explore in terms of, again, that the hardship and the struggle. And that if we did have a frontier to do over again, you know, how would we do it? And so one of the questions that Johnny, the main character, struggles a lot, he has his best friend is from across the lake from the Algonquin community. And that there's an underlying tension through all of the books about, well, whose land is this?
Mm.
You know, and in the story, in the Western, it's who's ever got there, whatever white person got there first. Didn't matter who was there before then. And so I was trying to like explore that a little bit about, well, how else can we do that? So in this new frontier, you know, Johnny really struggles with, you know, his own idea of how his ownership of the land is, and because he's kind of the leader, and, you know, there's a certain assertion of propriety rights there, but the land doesn't belong to him. And that's his journey to kind of discover. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. Um, your characters are just so real to me. I mean, I plow through these books. I want to be in their world. I mean, not with, you know, the
Not with the
perpetual
snow.
winter, the lack of food, but they just seem like, you know, I just want to go and chill with them and, you know, have a conversation, you know, see what Tiny's making in the kitchen, see what kind of crazy remark he's going to say to me. So what parts of this story did you feel had to be presented in a particular way, you know, such as Mitch Black, the, you know, kind of bad character, although she's multifaceted. You know, you know, Chum Boy, how important was it to have that character there? Yeah.
Well, I think Mitch Black has sort of been a character that sort of kicked around in my head for a while. I really like the idea of a woman who has a certain fearless quality, but isn't self-conscious about it, and no one else is self-conscious about it. I mean, so often when we have a strong woman character, it's like something that's constantly, people refer to it constantly, or it becomes a source of conversation. But Mitch Black is just herself. She could be a man, she could be a woman. It doesn't really matter. She is who she is. And she came fully formed to me like that. Like she's been kicking around in there, and she finally found a book that she could kick ass in, I suppose. Chumboy is pretty organic as well. Like, I mean, I had Johnny in my mind, and it was, again, an attraction to those sort of classic action, catastrophic movies. You have this scenario, and you have usually a guy or a couple who have to kind of make their way through it, And I really wanted strong women in it, and I wanted Johnny to be that sort of classic kind of cowboy type of person, and then others just sort of, they just sort of, you'd be writing a scene, and suddenly there'd be, a couple of other characters who make an appearance, and it was very organic after that point. They all kind of showed up. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, okay. There's a very organic quality. They come to inhabit your imagination. So I'd be driving, and there would be someone, and they would, and suddenly there would be somebody else that they were interacting with. It's almost like it was all there, and they were just revealing it to me as we went along.
And so writers often talk about that process. So how did you get it down on paper? Did you kind of like have a piece of notepad beside your bed, and here they come? Or like you said, you were driving. Did it just, okay, I got to go home and get this down on the computer? Or how did it come to you?
Well, I probably forgot a lot of the book, actually, driving there to the grocery store and think, oh, I should write that down, and forgot it. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of, it percolates for a while, and it percolates to the point where you feel, oh, they're really ready to commit to paper. And then that's the hard step. It's almost like almost like a rupture in the creative process for me, where it goes from, they're all just kind of doing their thing in there, and the storyline's building a little bit. There's enough fragments. Usually it's when I kind of imagine an ending, and then that's when I start to write. And I just write towards that ending,
okay.
And the book sort of comes. And I've always had my endings before I've started to write. But everyone does it different.
Did you have the ending to the third book when you were writing the first, or you had the ending for each book as it came?
Yeah, I had no intention of writing
a
trilogy. For sure, I was writing a book. And I think it ended. The first book sort of ended, and it resolved itself enough for it to be a standalone book. But they just weren't done with me. Like, I just really felt like they were still kicking around, had things to say. And so I wrote the second one, and it still just felt a little bit like that, like they were just still picking back there. But when I finished the third one, it was done. It's an interesting process. Yeah.
And where do you write? Do you have one spot, or will you write in different places?
I mostly write in my little darkened hovel here. I'm very light adverse. But when it's warmer, I write out on my porch. I like to do that. And then I get up very, very early in the morning and sneak downstairs with my coffee. And so sometimes I'll just write on the couch, but mostly up here, I think. The porch is a very, very nice place to work. It's very nice when it's just cold enough that it's still winter out, and you could work out when it was winter, but that's like a small window of snow and mildness that don't normally overlap.
But you have a lovely place. You have walking trails, and you're not living in a busy city, and you're even a drive to the grocery store sort of thing.
I'm very, very lucky. I'm very lucky. I know that. I live in a very old house. It's an old mine manager's house from the O'Brien mine. And there's an old mill, the old stamping mill in the back, the ruins of the old stamping mill in our backyard. And yeah, just kind of old abandoned mine properties in the back, and not too many people. And I'm one of those people when, someone drives down the road, I'm like, oh my God, there's someone on my road. What are they doing there? I'm one of those. I'm from Alberta. I don't think I can help it.
That's right. That's right. When did you come to Ontario?
1982.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
then I
went to
think
Toronto.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And then you moved up north in
1990.
90, sorry. Yeah. I mean, I moved up in 95
Hmm.
and I never imagined I would still be here. And, 25 years later, here I am.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So how does it feel to finish all three of them, to get to the third one and it's out and go, it's done?
Um, I'm sort of happy about it. I feel like it was funny. One my midwife, the woman who delivered two of my children, read the
Okay.
books, has read all of the books, um, and I've always been one of the main characters in the book is a midwife, and I've always
Mhm.
been really interested in the work of midwives and supported it, and thought it's a very important role, very ethical role, I think, for birthing to be done properly. Anyway, she said after coming to one of the readings in Toronto, she said that what I was saying about my book was the next book, in a way, that each book was dragging me forward in terms of what I was thinking about. So that by the time I'd finished the book, I was already like sort of looking forward to what else had to be grappled with in terms of the things that I'm thinking about our relationship with nature and how we be better and all of those things. And I think that's true. And I think where I got to at the end of this book, for me, was a really important insight. And I feel like my journey through that writing process brought me somewhere that has been really useful in terms of my own sense of how I should be in the world. And so in a way, it feels there's a real kind of like a pleasing sense of resolution to that phase of my personal journey. So,
Okay, nice. And so what's next?
well, I've been thinking of writing kind of a magic realism Western.
Mhm.
So that will be next. A little more, a little. I'm interested in boundaries, the parts between things.
Mhm.
So the difference between, above ground and below ground, dawn and dusk. Those boundaries where, like, one of the things I like most about walking early in the morning, and I'm a real morning person, but there's a time of morning where you can see, but you can't really see. And I think that's our predicament right now.
Mhm.
We see in a way what we should do, but we don't really see it. It's sort of like when you look at trees and you see, oh, they're beautiful, they're green, and you don't notice the aspen or the birch or the willow, right? It's that, I think they call tree blindness or green blindness or something. But then once you start to see, then you start to see all of the trees and all of the shapes of their leaves and the color of their bark. And it's like this awakening process. And to me, that whole issue of what we see and don't see. So in the dawn, you can't tell if it's a form or a human being or a monster or a raven or a rock, And I really like the mind wandering in those places. So I'm trying to bring that sense of uncertainty and wonder to a Western.
Okay. So I want to make sure that people can find you because you are talking on your social media channels. You do the Radio Cobalt
Mhm.
thing. And as we've seen here today, that you have lots to say and lots to share. And so can you just tell us, the audience, where they can find you?
Well, I have a website. I'll be darned if I could sort of, how people say it's WW. I have no idea what it is. So you just have to search my name, I guess. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram. So I have profiles there under my name, under Brit Griffin. And yeah, that's where I try and create sort of different aspects of my work. It's all sort of around the same themes and issues, but I do a little bit of kind of poetic musings. I don't know if they're really poetry, but they're musings that are sort of poetic and sort of talking pieces, and post pictures when I get grumpy about people dumping garbage and things like that.
Good. Well, we're right there with you. And I'll just add, as the publisher of the books, that you can find copies of all three of these books at Chapters Indigo. So go into a chapter store or order online through indigo.ca. You can get them at Chat Noir, who is in New Lisker, close to where Brit is, and he also offers signed copies. And in North Bay, Alice and the Bookman has copies as well. And when you go into a bookseller, especially independent bookseller, you just ask them, if they don't have a copy on the shelf, just ask them to order it in, and they will. And of course, Latitude 46 Publishing Bookshop offers copies. And if you're in the Sudbury area, we do $2 delivery, or if you're not in the area, we can ship as well. So get your hands on this trilogy, because it's one of my favorites.
Thank you.
So I'll hand this back to Pierre.
Yeah, that was an excellent talk. Thank you so much, Britt and Heather. It was really awesome. I really liked the dystopian aspect of the themes, and really, like, I was listening in on just kind of the connection with just with global warming. I think these themes are going to be more and more realistic in writing, and obviously in film they're there. But I mean, like, who knew that those types of themes are just kind of becoming more real, right? So I think it's really great. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. You'll be able to find this video on our Greater Sudbury Public Library Facebook page. We'll also be uploading it to YouTube. We want to thank everyone for watching. And again, this has been Let's Talk Books, which is a great series. And Heather, thank you so much for helping us out with this. I think it's great for our Northern authors to express themselves, and also sharing a little bit more about that whole behind the author scene, which is really great. So and I hope you both have a wonderful evening. And again, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you very soon.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.